Hello and welcome to session 2 of bias training. I'm excited that you have joined me again as we continue to journey through what it means to understand both explicit and implicit bias in our relevant context. We're going to continue now as we do our best to give you a little bit of a review of session 1. One of the things that we remember is we covered our objectives, which are to provide awareness and understanding of implicit bias, explicit bias, and structural racism in relevant and contemporary context. We want to provide awareness and understanding with specific examples regarding the impact of implicit and explicit bias in clinical settings. We want to complete the implicit bias assessment, and we're going to talk about that today because today is that day that we review the Harvard implicit bias assessment. And then we want to provide some strategies along with next steps for objective implicit bias behavior modification, provide awareness that we all have biases, but it's a worthwhile lifetime journey to dismantle them. So here we are. Just as a reminder, this is hard work. But each participant should be prepared to engage. And for many of you, engagement will look like you interacting with people in your community, perhaps even family members. Those of you that are a part of the live sessions, engagement looks like interacting with each other. But again, as we're doing the hard work, we're asking you to be respectful of one another because they're going to be varying perspectives. We all have what we consider the 3 E's. We enter each room with our own educational experience. It's what we know. We enter each room with the environment that we have come from, so our cultural background. And then we enter each room with our experiences. Those are the 3 E's, the educational background, the environment, and our experiences. And when we bring those things to the table, they are often vastly different than the others that we're interacting with. But that's the beauty of understanding one another. And I'm going to suggest that we seek to understand and not always seek to be understood. So here we are with session 2, and today we're going to ask the question, why am I biased and how do I overcome that bias? It's going to be an analysis of the pre-assessment, as I stated a few moments ago, and the things that shape us, the experiences, the education, the environment, like I just said. And then we're going to understanding the difference between interpersonal, institutional, and structural racism and how that impacts the health and well-being of the people that we serve in our context. Just as a review and as we look forward, bias is a disproportionate weight in favor of or against an idea or a thing, usually in a way that is closed-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. Biases can be innate or learned. People may develop biases for or against an individual, a group, or a belief. In science and engineering, a bias is a systematic error. And you will hear us talk about that. How do we check those biases? Now, those of you that witnessed or participated in session 1, you know that we talked a little bit about this exercise where we used as an example a lawyer, an athlete, genius, rich or wealthy as a category, hip hop or rap as a category, and then even CEO as a category. And out of hundreds of respondents that participated in that exercise, what we learned was that we overwhelmingly thought when we first think of a proper noun, when given the category of lawyer, we overwhelmingly think white male. And if there are some of us that mention a black lawyer or a female lawyer, the black lawyers are usually coming from people that are also black, and the female lawyers are usually being recognized by people that are also female, with very few exceptions. When we think of athlete, the athletes are usually male, with a few exceptions. And the first things that we think about when we think about athlete, if we are a male, we think of a white or black athlete. If we're female, often we also think about a male athlete, but every now and again we think of a female athlete. And it's ironic, as I have stated in the previous session, that even though the first thing that usually comes to our mind is a male athlete, the most decorated US Olympian that competes throughout the world at this time, the time of this presentation, is Simone Biles. But we often don't think about her. Perhaps it's because we are biased against the Olympics, being that it only comes up once every 4 years. Regardless of the case, we notice that there's a group think that suggests athletes are white or black males, lawyers are typically white males, genius, typically white male, rich or wealthy people, typically white male. But hip hop and rap, that category has been dominated in our group think by black males, CEOs, again, white males. And so we have to ask the question after digesting this, what do we think about the responses that we gave? Are we okay with those responses? And for those of you that participated in the last session, did you review those responses or share those responses with others? And what was that conversation like? And then finally, if you could engage this again, would you do it differently? Would you do it differently? And so I'm going to give you just a few seconds to think about that with respect to the exercise so that you can see, would you do this differently if given that opportunity again? Okay, for those of you that suggest that you would do it differently, I have an opportunity to test that theory. I want you to look at the graphic that I'm about to show. And when you look at this graphic that I'm about to show, I want you to see if you can notice any bias. I'm going to give you a few seconds to look at it. You see if you witness any bias, anything that might lend itself towards being biased, something that, again, is a blind spot that could potentially cause harm. We have used that example. We have allowed that little illustration to be woven through our sessions. And so that blind spot, imagine you're driving on the interstate and you're about to change lanes or you're going to move forward. You've got to check your blind spot to make sure that there's no one that's coming alongside you as you're attempting to change lanes and move forward that's going to collide with you. You've got to check that blind spot so that no one in your car, including yourself, or the person in the other automobiles will be harmed. It has caused great harm. It being biases has caused great harm with respect to relationships, marriages, friendships, business associations, even careers, because of unchecked biases. So here we go. Do you see, and I'm going to give you a few minutes before I come back in and respond, do you see any biases with regards to this picture? Now, I've given you a little bit of an opportunity to see it. Let me provide some context, just in case you have not zoomed in enough to be able to see the two different boxes of this baby carrier that's being promoted by this company. On the left, there's a baby carrier by a darker skinned young lady with a baby in this wrap. The price on the box appears to be $30. And there's some language that details what type of product this is, being organic. And some of the details in the bottom right suggest that this is made out of 100% certified organic cotton. Okay. The picture on the right is a person that's lighter complexion. There are no details regarding the materials, and the price appears to be a little bit more. it seems to say $35. Some of the things that you may have already noticed: there are three human beings in the box on the right, only two in the box on the left. Obviously, they're different colors. The wrap on the right that is supposed to be made out of cotton, that one actually to me looks a little bit uncomfortable. The baby looks even more snug, but perhaps the baby is far more secure. If you look closely, you can see that the lady on the left with the darker skin, she's actually holding, it appears, with her right arm, the baby just to the rear of the photo. You also notice that perhaps there is some type of inclination that suggests one box has more value than the other. And so I wonder if there's harm done by the fact that there seems to be the perpetuation of a negative stereotype, in so much that the lady on the left is appearing to be a single mother with darker skinned, whereas the box on the right seems to have a family structure intact. The lady on the right does not show that there could be a same sex couple, but this appears to be a heterosexual couple, if they are in fact a couple at all. And so there is a lack of representation if we're trying to be representative of all relationships. There's also concern about the size, as we have heard from previous sessions, the size of the females, being as though this may be biased against ladies that may be of a different size or proportion, because these ladies look very slim for having just had children, something that was brought to my attention by several other females. And so, what do we make of the notion that the lady with the darker complexion is promoting a baby carrier seemingly as a single mother, and her box details that the materials are made out of cotton? And what do we make of the fact that the lady on the right is carrying the baby, perhaps showing a gender bias, because the male is not? And what do we make of the fact that both ladies appear to be in casual clothing, whereas the male appears to have on business casual with a white collared dress shirt? Now, these are probably models. And for the most part, or as far as we know, these aren't even real mothers. Because a lot of times, graphic designers, people that work for companies doing images and the like, they often use stock photos, stock art, and what have you. But in this case, we don't even have to look at the ladies as though they have done something wrong. But we have an opportunity to identify the decision makers and figure out, is this what they want portrayed on behalf of their company? Something that appears to show bias and perpetuate negative and or harmful stereotypes. Take a look again, and then we'll go to the next image. There's one other thing that was pointed out, and that is the fact that the lady on the left with the darker complexion also seems to have straight hair, perhaps suggesting assimilation as opposed to acculturation. Now, wait a second. What is assimilation and acculturation, you may ask? Well, assimilation is a situation where you are a part of a minority culture, if you are the one that is assimilating, and you go to a place. It could be a country, it could be a smaller microscopic view, such as a workplace. And you are a part of a culture that is not your own. So you go and you engage with a majority culture. And when you assimilate, you lose your identity so that you become more like the majority culture. Whereas acculturation is where you do the same thing. You are a minority culture, you're part of the minority culture, and then you go towards a dominant culture, whether it's a country or something more microscopic like a particular workplace. But instead of losing your identity this time, you maintain your identity so that that space becomes multicultural. In other words, you can still be in a place where you are a minority, but you can maintain your identity and everybody can learn from one another. And certainly that seems to be the suggestion with regards to reconciliation so that we can learn from one another. We can learn from one another. So there is our first graphic. Two boxes that seem to mean two vastly different things. Now that you've had an opportunity to view and digest, let's continue to the next image. For context, these are two different screen grabs, but they are both from the very same week, on the very same day. They are from the same ABC affiliate in the same town. And as you look, it's the same alleged crime being perpetuated, which is burglary. Same affiliate, same day, same alleged crime, same city. But the depiction is very different. Take a look. So let's point out a couple of things. We'll start near the top. The first is that all of the anchors seem to be of the same skin complexion, perhaps lending the notion that they're all Caucasian. Maybe even the decision makers are Caucasian. And so perhaps that's how we get to the potential bias that we'll talk about in just a second. As we continue, the description suggests that on the left, there are 3 University of Iowa wrestlers arrested, burglary charges pending. On the right, police arrest 4 in burglary investigation. This is the same day, same alleged crime. Why aren't they explained similarly? On the left, it seems to be a support structure that is here to help these what appear to be gentlemen, 3 of them, because you've got the University of Iowa and the fact that they're student athletes. So certainly they would get kicked off of the wrestling team if there was a problem, or the school would kick them out if this was really an issue. And do you notice that one of them says pending and the other one says that there's an investigation that's ongoing? And then perhaps the more obvious is the fact that they just don't look alike. And I'm not talking about skin complexion. As far as I know, the gentleman or the perceived gentleman on the right They could be of any nationality, but they have darker complected skin, whereas the gentleman on the right, excuse me, the gentleman on the left have lighter complected skin. They are seen in suits and ties, perhaps a yearbook photo from the University of Iowa. Now, I'm not certain that we should be upset with the gentleman, but somebody was hired to pull these photos. And maybe even these are the first photos that they could pull when they typed in the names of these folks that are being allegedly charged with this burglary. But why didn't they represent both people, both groups of people, the same way? On the right, it looks like mugshots, and nobody looks happy. They almost look scary, and for the most part, their complexion looks a lot more like mine. But I'm not sure that these are individuals that I would really want on the streets. Gentlemen on the left look like they deserve another chance. I'm not certain about the gentleman on the right. And then there's one other nuance that I want to point out, and that is it seems as though we have photos for the gentleman on the left, but on the right, we've got photos and video that might suggest we've got more evidence on these guys. What does that say about our perceived bias? All right. Today, we also wanted to talk through the Harvard implicit bias assessment. It was an assessment that we asked each of you to do, and this assessment was supposed to challenge your notions of race and the standard demographic. And it'll ask you to quickly pair different groups into categories. And the way that it was structured was for you not to really overthink. And so, how did you do? What was your predominant bent? In other words, were you leaning towards being more biased towards European Americans or perhaps African Americans? How did you feel about that? Did it reaffirm what you perceived before you took the assessment? Now, and I want to share a few things as we deconstruct. The first thing is both the creators of that Harvard assessment, of which I was not one, and sociologists that have critiqued that assessment and others that have critiqued it, they all point out that this is just one tool in your toolbox. And this is not an end all be all. In other words, you can take this assessment, but it doesn't suggest that you're in the clear and you're totally biased or that you're totally unbiased. It's a snapshot in time. As a matter of fact, you could take the exact same assessment 3 times in a row, as we've had people do. One time we had a lady who actually had a headache. She took the assessment with the headache, and then she came back, I suppose, about an hour later after taking some aspirin, and she answered as best she could the same way, but received different results. And one of the reasons is because that assessment was based on how timely you were with your results, how timely you were with saying that this person is good, even though they may have a broader nose and thicker lips and darker skin, versus this other person that may be good with a lighter complected skin, a more narrow nose, and perhaps thinner lips. And so if it took you a little longer to suggest one of them was good versus the other, then your results may change because it's based on time. But again, this is just one tool in the toolbox. How did you feel? How did you feel? Okay, so as has been our propensity where we played in the last session, brief media clip to kind of wrap things up. We're going to do that here as well. Now, this particular media clip, you are going to have to pay attention because it's delivered in a foreign language. We're going to talk more about this in our next session, but we want to give you an opportunity to view it now, and maybe you even have some initial thoughts. Write those thoughts down so that you'll be prepared for our next session. Take a look at this video.
Quale bambola è bianca? Quale bambola è nera? Quale delle due è bella?
Questa.
Qual è quella bella? Qual è quella brutta? E qual è quella buona? Quale è cattiva? Qual è buona?
Lei.
Perché è buona?
Perché ha gli occhi celesti.
Quale è cattiva? Perché è cattiva?
Perché è tutto nero.
E qual è la bambola che ti somiglia di più? Quale bambola è nera?
Mi ha offeso.
Chi?
Tu.
Perché?
Perché mi hai chiamato nera.
Perché ti offendi?
Mi offendi perché altri bambini mi hanno offeso con cattiveria.
No, io non ho usato nessuna cattiveria.
Quello sto mi sta guardando storto.